video will cover some basic information about how to write a literature review, which is a very common assignment found in undergraduate college courses. This type of paper serves many different purposes and goes by many different names. In addition to being called a literature review, it can be called a term paper, an end of course paper, and a lot of other things. And sometimes those terms mean different things to different people. If you're not a student enrolled in one of my classes, check with your professor to make sure that what you learn here is in line with their expectations. The first thing to know is that the term literature in this context has absolutely nothing to do with the kinds of things you might read in an English class, so a literature review will almost never include anything about stories or poems or plays or anything like that. What this term refers to is academic literature, which we can define as everything that has been published on a particular topic of interest within a particular field, referring especially to peer-reviewed articles reporting on the results of research studies. So if you're writing a literature review in a psychology class, for example, you're going to be reading and writing about what the academic literature in the field of psychology has to say about a particular topic. We'll start with a broad overview. A literature review is a report on information located in scholarly academic sources focused on a specific narrow topic. The goal in writing a literature review is to provide a sense of what's already known about a given topic. It also might be useful to know that writing a literature review is the starting point for any research project in the real world, which is something that most students will be required to do during a 4-year degree program. An important point before we go any further is that in a literature review, your task is to take information from sources. The words must be entirely your own, and it should be said that you also have to make clear where the information came from. I'll say a little more about that in a few moments. But importantly, you cannot just copy information from sources. That would be plagiarism, and that will definitely get you into serious trouble with your college if you do it. So if a literature review is a report on the academic literature that exists on a subject, the academic literature you use is pretty important. It's important to remember that everything written in a literature review comes from the sources reviewed. It just reports the information. It does not respond to sources or give any opinion about what the sources say. The literature review also does not make an argument, write about an experience, or tell a story. It's strictly an informational paper. Where the information comes from is also really important in this type of paper. The information in a literature review must be drawn from scholarly sources, which, in general, must be located through a college or university library. These scholarly sources could include peer-reviewed academic journal articles, chapters from books written by experts, research reports produced by government institutions, and in some cases articles from major national newspapers and major national news magazines. I can't cover everything in this video that you might need to know about searching for and locating sources, but you can find that information in a separate video titled Locating Academic Literature, which is also available on my YouTube channel. If you're a student in one of my classes, you'll be assigned to watch this video, so you don't need to worry about looking for it. Before we get into talking about the structure of the literature review, I want to say a few things about reading your sources and locating the information you'll need to write your paper. The first thing is really obvious, but it just has to be said. You have to really read and reread the sources you select for your paper, take notes on them, and get to know them really well. The more you internalize the information in your sources, the stronger your paper will be in the end. So often I see students having trouble with this type of assignment. They just aren't familiar enough with their sources. The next thing you'll need to do is more difficult, though. As you're reading, you'll need to look for what I'm going to call common themes in your sources. Look for how the sources talk to each other. Find the similarities between the sources and make notes of them. You'll organize your paper around these themes. You must identify at least 3 in order for your paper to have a clear and logical organization. In just a little while, I'll be showing you an example of a literature review, which students in my class will have already been required to read. It's about the phenomenon of helicopter parenting, meaning the way that parents these days seem to micromanage their kids' lives all the way into adulthood. As I was reading what the academic literature in psychology has to say about the phenomenon of helicopter parenting, there were 3 things that most of the 5 or 6 articles I looked at mention. Multiple articles presented data about just how common helicopter parenting really is. Several articles also tried to understand the root causes of helicopter parenting, and still others discussed the impacts that helicopter parenting is having on both parents and their children. These are the themes that I ended up organizing my example literature review around. Now we'll talk about how to actually go about organizing a literature review, where to start, what kinds of things you should say in each paragraph, and things like that. Again, there are many different variations on the literature review, but a standalone literature review will usually have the following 4 parts: what we'll call a background section, a thesis statement, a report on the literature, and a references section. From here, we'll discuss each of these sections individually. The background portion comes at the beginning of the paper. It should be pretty short, maybe one or two paragraphs, and here you want to do three things. Introduce the topic, communicate the topic's importance, and reflect your interest in the topic, letting the reader, most likely your professor for a particular course, know why you chose the topic and why it matters to you. The thesis statement should come after the background. It should be a single sentence that reflects the content of the paper and the strength of the research. It should define the topic narrowly and be specific but not too detailed and wordy. Here's the thesis statement from the example paper I mentioned earlier, to use as an example. Parenting styles have shifted dramatically in recent decades, moving from a more permissive to a more restrictive approach, yielding both positive and negative effects for both adult children and their parents, particularly as children emerge into young adulthood. After the thesis statement comes a report on literature, which will constitute the vast majority of your paper. It will just be a report on the information from your sources, and it should be at least 4 paragraphs. Here you only report on information from your sources. You must also cite your sources within the text, giving credit to the authors of the sources. And there are very specific requirements for doing this. As with material about locating sources, I can't cover everything in this video you need to know about in-text citation, but you can find that information in a separate video titled How to Do In-Text Citations, which is also available on my YouTube channel. At this point, I think it's a good idea to just give a reminder that you must use entirely different words than your sources in this part of your essay. You can't just copy directly from the sources. That would be plagiarism. In terms of what to say in each paragraph of the report on literature, remember what I said earlier about identifying themes in your sources. You'll organize this part of your paper around themes you identified when reading your sources. You should write at least one paragraph about each theme, and you want to make sure that each paragraph is distinct from every other paragraph. Every paragraph should contribute something different. And it's important to say that your goal here is to choose information that's not commonly known, not just stating very general facts and providing a citation for them. That's part of what separates a literature review from one of those silly little essays you wrote in school. You have to uncover something new and surprising information that isn't commonly known and actually teach the audience something new and show that you've learned something new yourself. And finally, regarding the report on literature portion, your goal is also to synthesize information from your sources, to bring together information from different sources in each paragraph to develop the theme of that portion of your paper. And it's a common requirement that each paragraph must cite at least 2 sources. Now, something that you're definitely going to hear conflicting advice on is the summary conclusion that we've all been taught to expect in an essay. It's a good idea to just leave that out of this type of essay, and a lot of others for that matter. If you think about it, the summary conclusion, restating what you said before, doesn't serve much of a function, especially in this type of a paper, and can often lead to a negative reaction from your reader, which is to say your professor. Finally, a correctly formatted references section is critical for a literature review. Doing quality research is central to the purpose of a literature review, and the references section makes clear what sources were used. For most courses, you'll want to use APA formatting guidelines for the references section, but students enrolled in my first-year writing courses will use MLA formatting guidelines because that's what's used in English departments. But the two formatting styles are pretty similar. I've covered MLA formatting guidelines in the references section in another video titled How to Format a Works Cited Page in MLA Style. The last thing I'll provide here is a copy of the example literature review. I'll put each page up on the screen for about 5 seconds. You can pause the video to read each page on your own.